This webinar is also being broadcasted in YouTube. You can go to the Global Catholic Climate Movement YouTube page to see this webinar. So we're going to wait a couple of minutes more before starting.
Sounds good.
Okay, Lauren, are you ready? Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar of today. This is a webinar organized by Laudato Si Generation, which is part of one of the webinars that celebrate the Laudato Si Week, the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si about the care of our common home. So we would like to invite people to introduce yourself, if you will, through the chat, so we can see how this global family is connected from where are you joining us. So as usual, we would like to begin this webinar with an opening prayer. We'll use the common prayer for the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. So in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Loving God, creator of heaven and earth and all that is in them, you created us in your own image and made us stewards of all your creation. You blessed us with the sun, water, and bountiful land so that all might be nourished. Open our minds and touch our hearts so that we may attend to your gift of creation. Help us to be conscious that our common home belongs not only to us, but to all of your creatures and to all future generations, and that it is our responsibility to preserve it. May we help each other secure the food and resources that they need, be present to those in need in these trying times, especially the poorest and those most at risk of being left behind. Transform our fear and feelings of isolation into hope and fraternity so that we may experience a true conversion of the heart. Help us to show creative solidarity in addressing the consequences of this global pandemic. Make us courageous to embrace the changes that are needed in search of the common good. Now, more than ever, may we feel that we are all interconnected and interdependent. Enable us to listen and respond to the cry of the air and the cry of the poor. May the present sufferings be the birth pangs of a more fraternal and sustainable world. Under the loving gaze of Mary, help of Christians, we make this prayer through Christ our love. Amen. So, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. So we will start with this webinar about composting. Our keynote speaker is Lauren Tork. She is an entrepreneur, consultant, and musician, focusing on creating an equitable zero-waste world. She is the founder of Fear as Zero, a zero-waste software company, and the co-founder of Play with Music, a music and tech education program for underserved youth. Highlights of her consulting clients include the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change of the Paris Agreement, Google, Good, and Airbnb. She has held guest lecture and advisor positions for the University of Southern California, the LA Clean Tech Incubator and Art Center, and she has been a speaker and performing at TEDx, the Ocean Plastics Leadership Summit, Hatch, and more. So welcome, Lauren, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying that prayer was so beautiful and moving, and what a wonderful way to start the day and to celebrate Laudato Si. And thank you, Global Catholic Climate Movement and Laudato Si Generation for having me. This is really amazing. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and dive right in. Hi, Domenica from Ecuador, and hi, Lucia Silva from Argentina. Okay, I wish I could see you all right now, because normally I'd be like, who knows what composting is? And doesn't matter if you've never heard of it, we're going to talk about compost, but it's this magical way that the earth, you know, as you say, we were made in God's image, and the earth was made to have this beautiful, endless cycle of life, where this watermelon is not garbage. It's actually filled with nutrients that when you put them back in the soil, those nutrients help new life to grow. And in nature, there's no such thing as waste. There's no such thing as garbage. In nature, in the circle of nature, everything is food for life. Everything creates new life. And all we have to do to take care of the earth is to embrace that cycle, which is perfect. So that's kind of why composting is amazing. A reality check. I'm only going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the realities that we're up against with the destruction of our climate, but food production is the #1 cause of deforestation, of water extraction, and of biodiversity loss worldwide. And in many cases, as you may hear about, that means the Amazon rainforest, this precious ecosystem of biodiversity and specialization. These old growth forests are being cut down to grow food and to graze animals, to grow food to feed the animals. And I truly believe everyone in this world needs to, eat and should eat well, but there has to be a way to do it without destroying our planet. And here's the crazy thing. For all of that destruction and loss of life, we throw away 33% of the food that we grow. That's 1.3 billion tons worldwide a year. And when you hear that, it's hard to conceive of, and maybe you think, oh, well, perhaps it's coming from grocery stores or restaurants or from the farms themselves. And it is, but 43% of the food going into landfills is coming from our homes, which means that we can change that. We have the power to be the solution. The choice is ours to make a difference. And it's the most simple, elegant thing, simply not putting food in the trash, but composting it, can make the world a better, greener place. Another reason why composting is really important is because all of that farming that's happening, we're actually destroying the soil, because these huge scale operations are using synthetic fertilizers to fertilize soil. And it's kind of like if you were to have a cup of coffee when you're tired, it'll get you through the day and you won't feel tired for a while. But if you never sleep, at some point, it's going to start getting really hard to be healthy. And that's what's happening with our soil. We've put synthetic fertilizers on it for so long. And now the soil is eroding, which means it's either blowing away with the wind or being swept away with rains. and we're running out of it. So what we have to do is add nutrients back into the soil. And guess what? That's what compost does. That's one of the many reasons why food waste reduction is the third most effective climate solution. When you have healthy, fertilized soil, not only does it not blow away and erode, but fertilizing it with compost and other natural fertilizers, it allows the soil to actually absorb carbon from the atmosphere. This is part of the carbon cycle. This is how plants grow. Plants are made of carbon and light and photosynthesis. So when you have healthy soil, the soil absorbs and draws the carbon down from the atmosphere and stores it in the soil. And it also, healthy soil is able to absorb water. And that makes us more resilient against drought, which is important for growing food. So this is all interconnected. The solutions are interconnected and the problem is interconnected. And we can absolutely participate in it with our daily life by simply not throwing food away. It's amazing. This is kind of a fun little slide. Muhammad Ali, maybe some of you know of him. I like this slide because I'm basically saying compost wins. It's a safe bet. Composting fertilizes soil, increases soil health, capacity to store carbon and water. Whereas food in landfills, this statistic is about the USA, but it's true in most places, depends on the landfill sometimes, but generally speaking, food in a landfill produces methane. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's anywhere from 23 to, I've even seen upwards of 50% more powerful, more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. And the reason food creates methane when it's trapped in a landfill is because it doesn't have access to oxygen or the ability to decompose properly. It's matter, it's out of place. So we're actually cooling the planet by not putting food in landfills too, in addition to fertilizing soil. So all of this is a part of the beautiful, perfect zero waste world that we have been given. You eat a watermelon, you compost the rinds, the compost returns nutrients to the soil, and the soil creates another watermelon, and it goes on forever. So how do you do it? There's 3 categories I'll cover briefly. And the first one is composting at home. If you have a yard, you can create a bin outside. And this bin here, in the city where I live, which is Los Angeles, you can get this for $20. And it's just a simple plastic bin with you open the top, you throw your food scraps in, you give it a stir. It's pretty simple. You can make your own. You could use an old garbage can. You could make one with wood. If you Google outdoor compost bin, you'll see all shapes and sizes. It's not an expensive thing. You can easily make one. You just have to make sure that there's breathing holes so that oxygen can get in and that insects and worms are able to get in, but that it's closed off enough so that animals are staying out. That's it. So once you have a bin set up outside, then the rest of it is inside. When you're in the kitchen, take a bag or a bucket and you just put your food scraps in as you're cooking and going about your life. Instead of in the garbage, just put them in their own special space. And you bring it out to the bin when it's full. And there you go. I personally, what I do is I like to reuse a plastic bag and I keep it in my freezer. Because I live in LA, it gets hot, I'm in the middle of the city. I don't want to deal with bugs. Maybe that resonates for some of you. If you have some freezer space, it's effortless. It's absolutely effortless. A lot of my friends have their own designated bucket that they keep on their counter. That works great too. It's really up to you. The only other thing to remember when it comes to this outdoor bin is you want to keep the ratio of carbon to nitrogen pretty even. And what that means is nitrogen is coming from the food scraps and carbon is coming from plants. So when you put food scraps in, you want to cover it with a layer of like dry leaves and other plant matter or yard waste because that'll keep the ratio really healthy. You need both interacting with oxygen to have the decomposition process work well. So you might be asking, well, Lauren, what can I compost in my outdoor bin? Thanks to NPR, which is a radio station and news outlet, they made this beautiful image. Generally speaking, if it grew from the earth, the answer is yes. If it walked or swam the earth, no. And also if it's cooked in oils and butter, don't put that in either. It just takes really long to break down and needs a higher temperature to break down. And I'll share this presentation if anybody wants to reference it. You can also go to my website where I can give you resources. Okay, then if you don't have a backyard, like I don't have a backyard, which kills me, you could do something called vermicomposting. Vermi just means worms. And it's like having an outdoor bin, but inside your house. And so what you would need there is and you can Google, my image isn't showing up here for some reason. You can Google to get a sense of some of the ways people do it, but it's basically an enclosed bin with some air holes because oxygen needs to get in, and then you buy worms and you put your food in and the worms go to work. And they are these amazing little workers who are very hungry and will eat up your food scraps and transform them and detoxify them and get rid of pathogens. And red wigglers are the most common worm used, and they're they eat a lot, they have big appetites, they reproduce quickly, so they're really ideal. You want about a pound of worms for every 3 pounds of food to get started. That pound of worms will reproduce. So if you want to start your worm bin, you need a bin, you need a pound of worms, and then you need your food scraps. And another consideration here is the temperature. You just don't want it to be too hot for them. The same thing goes in terms of what can go inside. It's the same as an outdoor bin. Because again, temperature is kind of the deciding factor of whether or not you could include meat. And actually, well, we'll see in the next way that you can include meat. But one other consideration here is avoiding too much citrus. Worms don't like a very acidic environment. Citrus is acidic. So if you add a lot of citrus, they won't be happy and it will stop working. And then in terms of moisture, it should be moist, but you don't want it to be soggy. So, the worms are alive, they have preferences too. So we just have to learn with them. And there's all sorts of resources online if this sounds like your jam and you want to start a worm bin and watch. It's really fun for kids too, to get to like open the lid and be like, oh my God, look at the worms going. It's really exciting. It's like a science experiment. Okay. And another thing you can do at home is called the Bokashi method. And so Bokashi is a 2-phase process, and it's anaerobic, which means without oxygen. And the reason why this works without oxygen is because of the Bokashi mix, which is a bran. And it can be a different type of bran. It could be a wheat bran, it could be a grain bran. I've even seen like the bran from beer wheat being used, and they inoculate it so that basically this bran, you cover your food scraps with it, and it allows for fermentation to happen. You're fermenting your food scraps, and it has to be airtight, like no oxygen is supposed to get in for 2 weeks. You put the bran, the Bokashi on top of your food scraps, you just close it up, forget about it for 2 weeks, and then fermentation happens. And then you take it outside and you bury it for another 2 weeks. The food scraps are like, they're further along in the process of decomposition because of the fermentation that happened in that closed space. So when you bury it, over the next 2 weeks, you don't have to do anything. It just does itself, and it eventually just becomes soil, and it will start attracting, if you were to kind of dig in and see, you'd see worms coming. Here, this is a video that really takes you step by step. One of the advantages of the Bokashi method is you can put everything in there. Meats, leftovers, oily food, cheese, you name it, you can put it in. And that's because of fermentation. One other thing I'll say here is if you're gonna make your own, which is totally possible, I would Google that or click on this link here, which takes you through how to make your own. The bin is airtight, like I said, but you'll want to have actually on the bottom like a hole or two for this like juice to come out. And that juice is not something to be like thrown down the drain. It's full of nutrients and it's really, really great for if you have plants or just fertilizing any living thing that's a plant. That juice, or tea as it's sometimes called, is like miracle stuff. Okay. That's it for for home composting. Community composting. This is what I also do. You'll have to, I know we're all in different places in the world, so you might want to Google community compost in your city. Generally speaking, it's a community run food scrap drop off or like in a garden center. In LA, for example, where I live before the lockdown, you know, there's this organization called LA Compost, and they set up different bins at different garden centers or at schools. And they would also go on every Sunday to the farmers market and collect people's food scraps. And then they, as a nonprofit and with volunteers, would do the processing of the compost. And that's pretty fun. If you don't have a community compost in your neighborhood, you could start one. And if you want help figuring out how to start community compost, you can go on my website, farah0.com, and write me an email. We're developing resources to help people start more community compost programs because they're really amazing. They bring people together, they fertilize our soil. It's a great way to reconnect with our planet and with each other. And you know, also I think if your church is interested in having a compost bin or a community compost in the on the property, that might be a really cool way to come together as a parish and as a religious community to compost. So if you want help making that happen, just reach out and let me know. I'd be more than happy to. And like I said, we're developing resources for people on how to take this into our own hands, because for some, the home composting methods, if you don't have a yard, it might be difficult. Maybe you don't feel like dealing with worms. Maybe you don't want to have a science experiment. I get it. There's usually lots of green space or gardens that we could be composting in. It just takes a little bit of interest, a couple people coming together and saying, hey, let's do it. It's not expensive. It just takes a little bit of organizing. And, you know, your church, your gardens, and local nonprofits, those are your friends. And I'm sure they'll be willing to work with you. The other thing is city composting. Really depends on where you're at. It hasn't fully caught on yet. I think in the next 5 to 10 years it will, for all of the reasons that I was talking about above. People are starting to realize how important it is to fertilize soil, and that we are throwing away a precious resource when we throw away food scraps. But the thing about city or municipal composting is, at least in Los Angeles, I can speak to this, it takes like 5 years for the permitting process to happen, to build a industrial, huge facility, an anaerobic digester, and they're millions of dollars. And so it's taking a while for cities to go through that process and to you know, budget out those expenses. But in Los Angeles, for example, we have an 18,000 home pilot. New York City has a pilot program, but they just cut the funding for it. Really, it's the time for us to come together and make our voices heard and show our support for it, and show the city or show your community that you want to compost. And that'll make a really big difference. But it could be that in your community, you do have curbside collection. You could easily figure that out by doing a little Google search. And if you do have a green bin, then it's super easy. You just put your food scraps in that green bin and it gets picked up and it gets taken somewhere. And you might want to make sure you do some checking on where it gets taken, because sometimes these things are a little opaque. Another great resource is to kind of take a look to see if your city has a Green New Deal. That's what I did in LA. In LA, it says, we commit to reducing food waste by 75% by 2030. And then I went and looked at how far along we are, and I was like, hey, we're not even close. Like, how about we have more community compost? How about we use our garden spaces to set up bins for the community? And they're like, yes, let's do that. And so if you kind of do a little bit of research to see what your representatives are saying publicly, then that is helpful for you to bring compost to your city if you're passionate about it, which I hope you are. Oh, just real quick, South Korea is a really interesting case study because they had 2.7% diversion of organics, diversion meaning keeping food out of landfills. So really low success rate, 2.7 is like, ugh. But they brought that up to 95% by implementing throughout the entire city these smart bins. It's really wild. And they're really cute with this little dinosaur. You go up to it with your personal ID card, so that's a whole thing. And it like sees that it's you. RFID technology is like, oh, it's Lauren. And I'm like, hi. And the little bin kind of talks to me. And then right here is a scale. I weigh my food scraps. It registers how much I've brought, and then it receives it. And there's an incentive because in South Korea, their system is that garbage, it costs more for garbage to be collected than it does for your food scraps to be collected. And I thought that was really smart. And so the company that I have, we're working very much within a similar vein. We don't have smart bins or anything like that, but we believe that tracking and measuring and rewarding people for their food waste diversion for composting is a good thing. And that's how we can get more people to do it. So we're actually creating an app where you'd be able to search like all of the things I said about like, figure out, Google it. Instead of Googling it, you'd be able to just find information in the app. And then we'd tell you your impact, how much food you've kept out of landfills, how much methane you've kept out of the atmosphere, how much soil you've fertilized. And then that would become discounts on food. And that's our big vision that we're working on. And we're super excited about it. And the last thing that I just want to say is, if this speaks to you and you think composting is a good idea and you want to do it and you want more people to do it and you want us to heal our soil and you want to be a steward for the planet and for growing food and not wasting food, do it and share your story and create community around it and take pictures and post about it. Like, the more that we tell the story of compost, the more that we talk about how, food scraps aren't garbage, they're gold. They're this gold that heals soil and makes it super fertile and abundant and supports the circle of life. We have to be telling that story, and we have to make it beautiful and fun and do it with our friends and with our families and with our church community. The more that we do that, that's really how it starts, and that's how we build momentum, and that's how we change the world. So I hope you'll join me in being a composter. And if you have any questions, again, you can reach out on Instagram. We're at Farah0. We're pretty new, so don't be discouraged that we don't have that many followers. I just made the account like 2 weeks ago. And you can check us out online. And again, I hope you learned something. If you have questions, get in touch. I'll make this presentation available if that's helpful. And just thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Thank you so much to you, Lauren. So right now we have a moment for questions. If anyone in the participants have any question, feel free to share it in the chat box so we can ask Lauren. Also, a little reminder that we are live in YouTube. For people who could not join through Zoom, you can see the recording of this webinar and the live presentation there in YouTube. Okay, so let's have like a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to share it in the chat box.
Thanks, Raquel. Hi.
Okay.
Great question. So we got a question from Alex on how is community compost being handled during the pandemic. At first, so I can speak to 2 cities. Well, no, I can speak to more cities. I've been on a lot of like big webinars with community compost organizations around the United States, at least. It's been hard, and it depends. Some community compost organizations are still up and running, and some took a pause for a while and then reopened. So in LA, for example, the farmers market drop-offs were closed. The garden centers where people would drop off, some of those were closed and some of them weren't. It kind of depended on how that school felt or how that garden center felt, because all of this was a collaborative process. But what LA Compost started doing is the farmers markets in LA closed. And so they were collecting food scraps at the farmers markets. So what they did instead was find a different spot to collect food scraps on Sunday and communicated that to their community through email and on their website. And people are still coming. So they're composting less, but they're just pivoting. It just kind of took a minute to be like, oh, what do we do? Okay, let's wait. Okay, I think it's safe for us to open one back up and just be creative about it. In New York City, unfortunately, because the farmers market drop-offs were being funded by the city, it's kind of a complicated structure, but it was like the city funded a nonprofit that was running it, and the city cut the budget for that. So it's all been canceled. And actually there was a huge public outcry, and there was a petition that 15,000 people signed. And there's a meeting today about the executive budget. And a lot of people are writing their comments to their representatives being like, you know, we have to save composting. So we'll see what happens, but it's a fight. And it's, it's really important and it's really exciting. But it is possible to do it safely. Maybe your question had to do with safety a little bit. What we've done in LA, for example, is we just set up these big collection bins 6 feet apart, and people come with their mask and they never get, you know, within 6 feet of anybody, and they're not touching anything. They just come with their bag or their bucket and they dump it in, and that's it. And then the people who are working at LA Compost, you know, at the end of the day, they take everything and they're wearing gloves. And so it's totally possible to do it safely. You just have to be a little bit creative.
Okay, thank you so much, Lauren. So also, if you later have any questions or something, you can let us know so we can send those questions to Lauren. And maybe to close this webinar, would you like to give like a closing conclusion or greeting to everyone who now are watching you from home? And maybe they are like at home thinking that they can do things, but they for sure can.
Well, yeah, for anybody who just joined, composting is one of the best and most high impact ways that you can save the planet and, you know, protect our environment, because when you put food in the garbage, it goes to a landfill, and that creates methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas, and it heats the planet. And it keeps nutrients out of nature, because the truth is that food scraps are still filled with nutrients. It's food. It just didn't get eaten, but it's still food that's nutritious. And so instead of putting in the garbage, when we let it decompose together and it becomes new soil, then the circle of life continues and we can grow more food. And when we do let those nutrients from food become soil again, the soil is healthy and the soil is more able to draw carbon out of the atmosphere and store it underground. And it's more able to hold water. And all of this helps with fighting climate change. It also helps with growing food. And so just the simple act of not throwing food in the garbage, but composting is actually radically changing the world and helping fight climate change. And you could either do it at home, and I just gave a presentation on all the ways you can do that, or you can see if there's community organizations in your city. You can see if your city itself is composting. But I highly recommend taking things into your own hands as a community member. I highly recommend going to your church and seeing if they're interested in having a community bin. It's really easy to manage. It's safe, it's fun, it's a great way to come together and to do something really powerful for your community and for the world. That's what I have to say in closing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren. Just we got a little question from our viewer in YouTube. She would like to know if you could repeat your website, and also we can write down also in the chat so people can join and be part of this.
Yeah, I just put it. Hopefully everyone got it. It's ferazero.com, FERAZERO, and then on Instagram, it's at ferazero. You can reach out on Instagram, or you can send me an email through my website. We're, again, creating some resources for people who have questions about composting or want to start an initiative either with their church or with another community organization or just in a random green space in your city. You know, there's ways to get this stuff happening, and it's fun and it makes you feel really empowered. So yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Lauren, for this amazing webinar. I'm sure like many of us just learned everything that some of us maybe we didn't know about composting. So thank you again. And I invite everyone who are watching here and in YouTube or social media to look for Lauren's website. It's very interesting and you can learn a lot from that. So just to close, I like to do the invitation for the next step in this journey that is just starting with Laudato Si Week is to join the Season of Creation campaign, which happens from September 1st to October 4th. You can find more information in the website seasonofcreation.org. We have these also available in different languages for you all. And again, to invite you to join the World Day of Prayer on May 24th at your noon local time, which will celebrate the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si, and also you can join different online masses that will happen along this weekend during the weekend at laudatosiweek.org. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you again, Lauren, for your time and for sharing this amazing webinar.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.